What is up, guys? So I wanted to break down how I'm specifically coaching reps at HubSpot and Salesforce, Workday, and any really other platform sellers, how to actually quantify business value in your deals that's ultimately going to allow you to get alignment to executives and put together really powerful business cases that are going to give you a lot of leverage and deal control to ultimately close more deals. My philosophy is based in the fact that the entire market really shifted in about 2022 or 2023 when the Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. And we're still pitching ROI, we're still pitching time savings, and all those things are great, but we're really not anchoring it in the things that the business ultimately cares about and what the executives ultimately care about. And so I've kind of ranked what those are, right? The first one is reducing costs. That's the most important. It's the most concrete. It's the most immediate. It's not a projection. The second would be increasing revenue, reducing risk, increasing scalability, speed to market, and things like that. So I'm going to give you guys the exact kind of frameworks that I'm teaching a lot of teams, that I'm teaching a lot of sellers on how to actually create leverage and create deal control. In this use case, I'm going to use HubSpot specifically. Guys, the first thing that I like to just kind of talk about when it comes to alpha selling is that we have to lead, we have to dictate, we have to educate our customers on ultimately what's going to happen in each part of the sales cycle. I'm reviewing gong calls from teams, I'm working one on one with a whole bunch of different sellers. And what I'm seeing over and over again is that our customers are dictating to us what's going to happen in the sales cycle. They're running the sales cycles for us. We're losing all leverage. We're not anchoring on business value. We're giving pricing away too early. And then we really don't understand why we don't have any urgency in our deals. And then we basically get to the end and we're just negotiating on price and we have no legs to stand on. Right. So by educating the customer early on in the process, hey, here's what it looks like to work with us. Today is going to be a discovery call where we're really going to dig in deeper to the needs of your business and what's important to you. From there, if everything looks good, we'll put together a demo. Generally, on those demos, in order for me to get the best people, the best solution consultants on those calls, we will need, your chief marketing officer or your executive on the call to make sure that it's, best fit for you. And then from there, once we've established the business value and if it makes sense for the business, we'll put together pricing for you. Right. But in the discovery call, we're trying to quantify that business value. We're really trying to learn all the different things that are ultimately impacting their business. When we get that business value, we're not just selling products or features, but we're actually selling a solution to the actual problem, right? We use that in the demo specifically. Hey, remember how you told me that, this was going to help you guys increase conversion rates and that we figured out that each deal is worth $30,000 in ACV and that, you could probably increase conversion rate by 1 or 2 points here. Well, this feature specifically is what's going to unlock that for your business, right? Or, hey, remember how you told me you're paying for outreach, you're paying for Gong, you're paying for Clary, you're spending over $270,000 a year on all these different tools? Well, our platform here, that's specifically how we're going to help you consolidate those costs and save that money on your bottom line. And then when we have that business value, right? When we kind of identified that in the sales process, when we go to pricing, we have leverage because we've understood how it's ultimately going to impact the business. We verified with people in the business. And oftentimes when we get to the executive level, we're actually educating and teaching the executives things about their business they didn't know that was happening. And then we're proactively providing a solution to that problem. So we're going to jump into it, but if you want to close your deals in this new market, you really have to be anchored on the things that matter. And ROI and time savings they're fuguzi, they're fake, they're awazi, they're a woozy, they're not real, they're projections. So I really anchor on how are we specifically going to help your business reduce costs? If we know for a fact we're going to be consolidating systems, if we know for a fact they're not going to have to bring on more full-time employees due to our AI or whatever it is, we know that we're directly and immediately going to give their business those hard cost savings. Every business is different, but what I'm seeing is almost every single deal is going to a CFO, right? So when I was at Workday, I was working with $1 billion software organization. I had like a $13,000 deal go to the CFO for approval. And then I had like a $300,000 deal go to the CFO for approval, right? So let's kind of jump into that, but I wanted to just kind of set the stage here before we get started. Okay. So, this specifically is how I think about the business value power rankings for most businesses, most platform sellers, but we're just going to use HubSpot as an example, right? The number one thing that's ultimately going to move the needle for a business is how they're going to be able to reduce costs. I'm currently working with a corporate AE at HubSpot. We're working on a $22,000 MRR deal, right? And we were really struggling to get to power. We were really struggling to get to the CFO and to quantify how it's ultimately going to impact the business. But what I did was I had the reps slow down, proactively create a chart that shows, hey, what are their long term costs over the next 5 years with their current solution? What would they be on HubSpot? What are the pass through costs? And even though we kind of had an idea they were going to save money, we didn't actually take the time to break that down. Once we broke it down and we built out a projection of that, we figured out we were going to save the business about $2.1 million over the next 5 years. We immediately got that in front of the CFO, and now our deal is going to be on track, right? So, when you're thinking about working with businesses, the first thing that you really want to understand is what are all the different tools they have in their tech stack? How does all of the data flow to and from those tools? Right. And ultimately, what are the objectives of the business? If we know they're going to be growing and scaling through mergers and acquisitions, for example, what are they going to do with all of that company's technology? How are they going to consolidate it? And how expensive could that process look like? Right. So those are some of the ways we're looking to immediately reduce cost. If you're selling an AI solution and you're able to eliminate employees, right? That's also really important if we know for a fact that they're paying an employee on average 160 or $180,000 a year. Okay. So first and foremost, I truly believe that most times, right? And this wasn't the case, remember, like in the growth at all cost era, it was like ROI, increasing revenue, right? 100x valuations. Now businesses want to be profitable. They didn't care about reducing costs. Money was free. They wanted to get rid of it because it was worthless so they could pour on the growth. So that's what's really changed in the market, but I haven't seen a lot of sellers really adjust to that. Okay. But obviously, increasing revenue is important. So, for example, if we know that they're getting 100 leads a month and that they're only converting those at 1%, and each lead is worth $30,000, and we improve that to, 2%, and let's say they get an additional, two or three deals a month and they're making $90,000 more from that feature or that module, that's something real that we could ultimately anchor on. Okay. Efficiency gains. Now, I put this number three, but candidly, I think reps over index on like time savings. Like it's just so played out. Like everybody's like, oh, we can save you 3 to 5 hours a week, or we can save you, this, or we can save you that. And it's important, right? It really is important, but it's really hard to quantify to a CFO and it's really just a projection. So we can definitely say, hey, if you were able to use this time in different areas, how would it impact the business? But it's a lot harder, but obviously it is important, right? Especially if that time could go to other places that were ultimately going to help increase revenue for the business. Okay. Mitigate risk, right? Risk doesn't have to be compliance. It could be a cost risk as well. One of the largest deals I've ever did, it was $13.75 million. I built out a 5-year projection of what their costs would be. It was $17 million. Okay. And I was able to get that down to 14, but they weren't thinking about that. And that additional cash flow not only, was going to help them reduce costs, which is number one, but was also going to help them mitigate risk in their business. Okay. Scaling for growth, right? So sometimes these businesses are opening up new markets, they're selling new products, they don't have scalable systems that are going to allow them to increase their revenue as they continue to grow. And so we really want to take time to understand the impact of that and the trajectory of the business in that regard. And then finally, speed. I even work with a lot of technical sellers like at Confluent or Databricks, where it's like we're able to quantify if we can get these product releases out faster, how much more revenue will that bring in for the sales team? And then we'll go do discovery with the sales team to figure out, what are the products or the features that they're hearing that the customers want the most that are immediately going to move the needle for the pipeline, right? So this could be really any business, any software you sell, but primarily at the end of the day, just like you and I, we want to make as much money as possible in our income. And we want to, keep our bills as low as we possibly can. So we can take the profit out, we can invest it in the stock market or real estate. That's the exact same thing these businesses want to do. But I'm hearing a lot of calls is you're so focused on the features and the functionalities and what it does. You don't take the time to educate them on what the process is going to look like, right? You don't take the time to really dig deeper into how it's ultimately impacting their business. And so you're not getting to power. You don't have any deal control. The deals are super sloppy. And then there's an opportunity cost associated with where you could be using that time somewhere else. Okay. Here's a couple examples that I'm going to give you. I don't want to spend too much time here, but this is just giving you an idea of some of the questions you can ask to anchor to each business value power ranking. And if you message me, I actually created a specific prompt that will take your deal specifically and all of the relevant notes. It will rank all of these business value drivers for you, and then it'll give you questions based on quantified business value that you can ask. So these are a little bit elementary, but I'm just trying to give you guys an idea, right? So, hey, how many tools are you guys currently paying for separately? How much time does it take your team to spend manually updating the CRM after calls, right? Are you paying for point solutions that HubSpot already replaces? A lot of the times, these people don't even know that you have the tools, like especially at Salesforce and HubSpot and Workday. Like we have to educate our customers. They don't even know. We just assume they do, right? How much are disconnected systems ultimately costing you guys just to manage the integrations, and how much, how many people do you have to hire just to manage them, right? Increasing revenue. What percentage of your MQLs actually convert to sales opportunities? How long does it take your team to respond to an inbound lead? We found that if you don't reach out within the first 10 minutes, your conversion rate dropped by 30%. How many leads are you getting today? 1,000, right? Well, that's potentially 30% of your leads that we could be converting. That's 300 leads. And let's say it's, $10,000. That's potentially $3 million you're leaving on the table. See how much more powerful that is to an executive? Right? See how much more powerful it is if I know nothing about your deal and I'm an executive and I come to you and I ask you how you're going to help move the needle for me. See how it makes sense to me? I don't care about your AI. I don't care about your technology. I care about how it's ultimately going to help me grow my business, right? Time savings. We talked about this a little bit. This is one I'm not personally a huge fan of, right? But we can help at least talk through it a little bit, especially with the AI stuff and automating a lot of the workflows. We can talk about it, but it's a lot harder to quantify. Scaling for growth. Hey, if your business doubled tomorrow, if you opened up into a new market, could your current systems handle it without adding headcount? If so, how much would that headcount cost? Right. And then that's going back to reducing costs. So now we're double dipping. We're scaling for growth and we're reducing costs, right? So here's a couple of ideas for you guys. You can really kind of customize this for your deal and use my prompt, like I said. And now I just want to talk about like what it actually looks like to quantify business value in a specific example that I gave, right? So you're not going to get like an exact number every single time. So that the first thing that you really want to do is you want to identify the business value theme. And those are the ones that I just gave you. So increasing revenue, reducing costs, speed to market, reducing risk, scalability. Okay. So here's a very generic example. Hey, what's the biggest challenge right now that's impacting the business? Well, hey, we're actually trying to scale the business, but we can't figure out how much each project we take on is actually costing us. And if we have the resources to take on large and sophisticated jobs or projects, right? So this is based on a project based organization that we're selling a SaaS to, right? So in this specific example, they're trying to scale the business, which represents probably a lot of revenue as well, but they don't even know how much what each project is actually costing them. So they can't accurately forecast their capacity to take on new jobs, right? So in a way, we're focused on helping them increase revenue through scalability. We're helping them reduce cost, and we're helping them with increasing speed to market because they don't even know if they can take on new projects. So in this specific example, I use the scaling plus reducing costs is the business value themes. What data or insight would you need to be able to confidently scale the business and run more profitable projects, right? A lot of the times they're going to be like, well, I don't really know how that works. Or, I'm not really sure. Like, I'm really just focused on, saving myself as much time as possible, making sure we have a really clean UI. Well, that's when you actually need to stop and you need to educate and teach the customer how to actually think about this problem. A lot of these people, even at the VP level, at the director level, they don't really know how to think about businesses strategically. So you have to come in as a consultant and advise them on how it's going to impact their business while also, right, selling them on how it's going to affect their day to day. They might not really care selfishly if they're company runs more profitable projects and adds an extra, you know, $1 million or $10 million to top line revenue, they might want to go spend 2 or 3 hours at their kid's soccer practice, and they just want to buy a tool, right? That's going to allow them to save time. So, hey, no worries. Like we actually found that, you really need to understand on each specific project, like what your profit slope is, what your liquidated damages are every single time you go over a day on that project. And we recently had a customer who did this and they found out that at the end of the project, they thought they were going to be very profitable. They actually lost money because they didn't have access to that information. So based on that, how does your process work today? And do any of those things relate to you? So you have to, use that and teach them how to actually think about doing business with you. And sometimes you have to do that before you attempt to quantify, right? So now we do attempt to quantify. Okay, that's great. Like, how much does a project represent in terms of revenue to the business? Well, the bigger projects we want, they're usually an additional 250 to $500,000 in revenue for us. So if you're selling a SaaS, maybe you're selling to a B2B enterprise SaaS company. Hey, yeah, each customer that we bring on is $250,000 or $100,000 of potential ACV for us. Okay. Well, if you had accurate data, if you could make real-time changes during a project, would that actually help you increase profit per project? Or if you're selling more of a, to a B2B SaaS tech company, you know what I mean? It would be like, hey, well, if you actually had the proper tracking information for each one of those customers and you could identify them on their website, could you increase the amount of conversion and win more deals? So in this example, I say, hey, it's tough to say, but ideally we'd like to stay at 30% profit margin on average project today is 150,000, right? So you say, okay, well, what's your current profit margin on a project and what's the average size of one? Well, we think right now it's closer to 15%, and even some of them we've lost money on, right? So we know that, okay, the margin gap is about 15% from 15% where they're at today to a 30% profit margin of where they want to be. Just to make the numbers easy, on a $100,000 project, that'd be about $15,000. On 200,000, it'd be about $300,000, right? So then we talk about that a little bit more, and we also use the big number that we gave them, right? So, hey, this is roughly a $750,000 problem per year, assuming we can increase profits on projects 10 to 15% at $150,000 per project. That's $22,000 per project at 24 a year. And it's going to allow you to scale and take on those bigger projects, which you mentioned could be 250 to $500,000 each. Does that make sense? Would you agree with that? And just get them to agree. And you see how just like I'm teaching you how to think about it, excuse me, you're educating and you're teaching the customer how to think about it. So it's not going to be easy, guys. But I do see on calls all the time where they tell us all the different systems that they're using, and we don't stop and we don't take the time to ask, well, what are you paying for all those solutions? Or is there any data that you don't have access to that you would like to have access to that would allow you guys to convert more? Okay. So we really have to be patient with these people. We have to appeal to their personal needs, but we also have to be able to quantify the business value so that when we ultimately do get the business case in front of the CFO or the CRO or the CEO, they can look at it, they can know nothing about the product or what it knows, and they can know specifically how it's going to save their organization money, how it's going to help them make more money, how it's tied into those executive initiatives. And I always ask, hey, is there anything I missed, or is there any other big problems that are hurting the bottom line or the top line revenue of the business? Okay. So to give you guys a very simple framework, the number one thing that I think you can get out of a call, right, is quantified business value. If you can't quantify it in the beginning, you need to at least have a business value theme like we talked about. So are they trying to scale and increase revenue? Are they trying to, cut back and become more profitable and reduce costs and reduce risk? Right? Did I attempt to even get a number with the customer? And remember, if we don't know how the product is ultimately going to affect their business, if we can't actually quantify that, we're not going to have any leverage on the demo. We're not going to have any leverage and legs to stand on when it gets to pricing to say, hey, well, I mean, I'm happy to work with you on a discount, but we already identified we can save the business, $750,000. And then when you actually quantify the business value, you earn the right, I believe, to have a conversation with the executives, right? I talk about this a lot. It's called the CEO test. If a CEO knows nothing about your business, they know nothing at all about your business, and they called you and they say, "Hey, tell me in 60 seconds why I should buy your product." Most of you guys are going to start talking about, well, what it does and the features of the benefits versus saying, "Hey, Mr. CEO, I know for a fact you guys are leaving about $750,000 a year on the table. You're probably missing about 22 to 30,000. I've actually quantified that and I verified that with your team, and I'm asking you guys to invest about $100,000 to solve for it, right? So if we don't have a business case, if we haven't quantified business value, we don't have any deal control. And if we don't have any deal control, we can't create urgency, we can't get to power, and we sure as heck can't protect our margins and negotiations. So if you run a sales team, if you're an AE, if you want these customized to your business specifically, and you want to be leveraging this and using this in your deals, it's just like anything else. It's going to take time, and it's not going to be easy at the beginning, but the more you practice, but the more you get into in these habits, the more successful you'll be in your deal cycle. So if there's anything that I can do to help you or support you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Additionally, I do have a custom AI tool that I made that will actually take your deal. You can upload the information of your deal, and it will rank all of the different business value drivers based on what the customer has said. And then additionally, we'll give you ideas of new discovery questions that you can ultimately ask to quantify business value better. So I hope that's helpful. I'll drop the link to that below, and happy selling.
Alpha Selling.